Welcome to the PaleoPost podcast. I'm your host, Seth Chaggy, founder of the world of PaleoAnthropology. Join us as we journey through time to uncover the secrets of human evolution. Each episode, we delve into the groundbreaking discoveries, fascinating research, and the stories of our ancient ancestors. From the latest fossil finds to in-depth discussions with leading experts, the PaleoPost podcast brings the past to life. Whether you're a seasoned researcher or just curious about where we come from, there's something here for everyone. So let's explore our incredible human origins together. Hello, my paleo friends, and welcome to episode 9 of the Paleo Post podcast. I am so glad to be here, one of your hosts, Seth Chaggy. Before we continue, I just want to ask you to like and subscribe. We're getting near to the end of season 3. It has been such a blast, and I just want to, on behalf of our other hosts, thank everyone. I'll hand it over to them to introduce themselves, just so you remember who we are. Can't let that be forgotten.
Exactly. Well, I was going to say, first of all, I just had to point out too that you have to hit the like and subscribe buttons because they are little signs and symbols, and so it's only appropriate that we understand that when we see this. Can you imagine, like, a different culture would be like, "What is this? What is this thing?" Right? Like, if you actually think about this little mark, and they'd be like, "Is it an insult?" Like, you would. It's so funny, but like, it's so culturally specific. But that's the power of these tiny signs, is that it's literally universal now. We know this means I like this. Like, isn't that wild? I just something occurred to me while you were talking about like, there's Genevieve's random morning thought. I've had a lot of coffee, so you know. so you have to like and subscribe. But yeah, or like hearts or all those things that we've literally created an entire graphic language that didn't exist 30 years ago, 20 years ago, even. Really, isn't that cool?
Yeah,
so,
I mean,
yay,
we
humans.
could spend a whole episode talking about emojis. I mean, that's like a whole.
They're huge. Yeah,
like don't even get me started on the update that came to iPhones this week, where you can AI make any emoji you want using a description. So the symbol world just got quite a bit.
Did it really?
Yeah, you can literally.
Oh, there's symbols I want to make. That would be fun.
Totally off tangent here, everyone. But just whatever. So you know how like you have the faces for like different moods and everything, and just different actions. So my quote spirit animal, my favorite animal, is a squirrel. Okay. So I now have an army of squirrel emojis of them doing various different things.
You're like every single squirrel from here on in.
I just send squirrels to everyone now. So it's just that's.
Well, I haven't got a squirrel. You got to start sending me squirrels now.
I'll send you some squirrels.
Please do. That will make my day. Yeah. Oh, I love that.
Listen, I think it's quite important to think about as well. This is really important when it comes to the new language of emojis, because obviously it's only going to develop and get much bigger. But my generation of people don't understand what emojis are, what they represent. I mean, the only thing I can do is a smiley face or a miserable face. Yeah. It's usually a miserable face. So,
no, you're all happy faces, George. So, I love emojis. Again, I'm Gen X enough to recognize that there's some emojis I don't quite understand what they mean, and I'm slightly concerned. So I tend to avoid those ones. I have accidentally used ones I probably shouldn't have a couple of times. I was like, oh dear, I don't think that was what I meant at all. But I have my favorites. I love the little like nerd glass one. That one always makes me happy. And I like the little hug because that one makes me happy too. So yeah, no, I love sprinkling them in. My mom, though, she gets so grouchy because she's almost 80, right? So it's super funny. So on purpose, I will like spam her hearts, and she'll be like, oh my God, stop it. So can have some fun with it.
It would be interesting in the future, say 100 years' time, for anthropologists to look back and look at the development of emojis and how they develop.
Absolutely.
And also, I'd love to see somebody in 100 years' time, I won't be alive, of course, but looking down, seeing someone writing an essay using emojis as part of the grammar of their language. That'd be very interesting.
Yeah. Oh, put it this way, I have to admit, I'm one of those people that I slip them in even in fairly professional emails. I've just started doing it because I was like, but it's who I am. I like the emojis. I feel like they allow me, especially because text is such a tough format. There's no body language, there's no tone. And so I think sometimes emojis can soften it. I use them as a softener a lot of times so people understand what I mean. So no, I love them. I mean, they're the grandbabies of the geometric signs, right? Like literally
Exactly.
tiny, simple characters that embody huge amounts of meaning. But you have to you have to be culturally in the know, or you can't use them properly, right? Isn't that cool? Which is exactly what the signs are.
If I'm not mistaken, you did a Nat Geo Kids special on that, didn't you? Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I'm like, wait, this sounds familiar. This sounds familiar. I think I've seen this somewhere.
No, I love thinking about it. I think it blows my mind the more, but it's also it's such a great example with kids to help them understand why the signs are so important. Like, and also what are these signs? Because again, that idea that you have to be part of the cultural in-group to understand what they mean.
What's quite interesting is that a lot of the emojis which I use today, the hand emojis, for example, I saw Gladiator 2 the other day, and that meant you live, and that meant you die.
That's a very good point. And kind of going back to what Genevieve was saying, this means very different, could mean very different things in very different cultures. And so when you talk about emojis and you have so many more things, imagine each different culture having so many more explanations for what those different things mean. You're going to have literally, as you were predicting in the future, almost a language where you can just speak emoji.
Yeah. I'm wondering if that textual sort of language becomes a verbal language as well. I wonder if people will start to talk. I mean, in my lifetime, Seth, I've seen so much change in terms of, for example, in English, about 40 years ago, we had the BBC, which wanted to get rid of the BBC voice and bring in more regional dialects, and so what we've got now in the BBC repertoire is estuary English. And you're going to say to me now, George, what's estuary English? Well, estuary English is very much like it's not a slang, but it's a very, very sort of slick way of saying things if you are a presenter. So all the presenters we now have on the BBC, for example, there's a degree of an estuary English, or I'm trying to think of the word, but it's a dialogue which is coming through. So we've lost that very pointed towards you. This is the BBC to something which is far more regionally dialectical. So it is interesting that even in our lifetimes we're seeing change within language, and the point is that that's been helped with things like emojis, for example, because if I get a message from my son, for example, on his mobile phone, you get that that half the language is in emoji, and you have to try and work out what is going on. And it's difficult for me because, again, I'm not part of that generation, sadly.
Yeah. So, but you have a good history, at least, of paying attention to graphic communication because of your work. Yeah. So I think I treat it more like that, whereas it's almost like like what do they mean by this? So I enjoy them, but they're so useful in school classrooms as a bridge to understand. This is what we're trying to do, is understand the emojis in a way of our ancestors. And that's not like, I'm not trying to denigrate it or make it like the art isn't cool, but it's just, it makes it more relatable. And there really are characteristics about these little marks that have a ton in common with emojis. So yeah, it's so fun. I love watching history unfolding in action, right? Because we're making archaeology for the future.
Absolutely. And I think we could spend, like we said, a whole episode talking about this. We have to stop
now, or we're going to go down the rabbit hole.
So why don't we move to our first news story of the episode? And I will take point on that because it relates to fossil hominids.
Yay! And you can never go wrong with fossil hominids.
I know. I'm a little obsessed with them. I literally so another tangent. I'm running out of room, guys, for like my 3D prints. And my 3D printer guy, I'm like, please stop sending them. Oh no. Yes. And another large box is coming, like a large box.
Yay!
This time of Ice Age portable art items, and I'm very excited. But anyway, so this is is it? Yes. This is a Neanderthal, and this is close to us, modern humans, Homo sapien. And well, actually, this is a basal Neanderthal, is what Dr.
Does that mean
Stringer
it's
would call it.
older? That means it's an
It
older one,
is.
right?
It does.
Okay.
It means technically some people would classify this as a late Homo heidelbergensis. This is Altamira 5.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Did I say Altamira? I said
You did.
Altamira. I
Did
meant
you mean Atapuerca?
Atapuerca, yes, because
Okay.
Altamira is a
Cave art.
rock art site. I meant Atapuerca. So this is Atapuerca 5, which is the pit of bones where all of the Homo heidelbergensis were thrown in, and there's an exquisite hand axe down there as well. But anyway, going back to our story in the news, there's actually a new species that was announced that resides in East Asia. This species has been designated as Homo juliensis. You know, we can never say our names right here. Trying. And this new species, well, I'm a little conflicted about it personally. I know I've seen a lot of controversy on social media from the biological anthro people that I know. And the reason for this is this paper that announced this new species. And we have to remember, for a new species to be designated, there has to not be a previous grouping of those fossils or fossils like them that have already been named.
Mm-hmm.
In Asia, there is a much more complicated evolutionary morphological story than most people know. It is as complex as it is in Africa. We have so many species there, they're not as old, but the complexity of how many species there are, the interrelatedness, their variation throughout the continent is that. So, Dr. Christopher Bay from the University of Hawaii led this research project, and they decided that these fossils, which look very much like this guy, very much like a Neanderthal, very much like you and I, except their teeth were larger, their heads were larger, not significantly so, but to a point where they thought they were different enough from Neanderthals. And yet, from the people that I have spoken with, and I'm not going to name any names here, this should not be a new species. This is not something that has enough evidence to go, this is different from Homo longi, which has not officially been designated as a species because of the same reason. And the reason for that is all of these fossils have previously been under a species designation called Homo daliensis, which covers a large portion of these fossils from northern China and East Asia, and this Neanderthalish, Homo sapienish, Denisovan-ish branch that is a more collected grouping of fossils versus having Homo juliensis, Homo longi, Homo whatever they're going to call Denisovans when they decide to finally name them. I
was going to ask that. They don't have a proper like Latin designation right now. They're just the Denisovans, right?
That's a whole other episode that we could go on about.
Okay.
I don't honestly, I'm curious. I need to start asking, because the story that I've gotten is we don't have enough physical evidence to designate a species.
Yeah.
But we have the DNA, so that we need to change how we designate a species, because having the DNA to me is more defining than the fossils to begin.
Well, yeah. With this new one then, because here's my question. We don't have, like, what do we have from Denisovans? We have like a finger bone. Don't we have like, I feel like we have like a leg bone, or there's a couple other things now. Like, isn't it from up in the Tibetan plateau that they got something too?
We have a mandible, or half a
That's
mandible.
right. Okay, there's part
which
of
is the jawbone, which gives us a exquisite look at their molars and their teeth.
Okay.
Which teeth tell us
Tons.
so much information about any animal. Doesn't have to be a hominin or a human, any animal. And it's, so we have the jawbone. I believe we do have a femur or a
I think
leg
there was a
bone
long bone or something
from
too.
Tibet,
Yeah.
I
Okay.
believe.
Okay.
But the fossils are very scarce.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
that brings up a very interesting
Well,
question of
that's what I was going to ask.
why.
So is why, but
Yeah,
also we have this new skull, which is kind of robust, kind of Neanderthal-like. Could it be a Denisovan skull? That would have been almost where I defaulted to. I don't know. I mean, again, I am not a bioanth person, so I'm coming at this
right.
from the outside, but I know as well, I'm thinking about, George, do you remember that site in China? It was a colleague of Francesco Derrico, and I'm forgetting his name right. I think his first name was Luc Doyen, I think is it? The one that they did, it was 125,000. They were bones with linear marks that were found at a site in China, like linear engraved marks on 125,000. And the skulls were more robust than human skulls, but they didn't know whose they were. And so, like, do you know what I mean? So, like, there's a lot of mystery over there.
Thing is, depending who you're talking to in terms of bioam, you can push or contract the Neanderthal range, for example, quite considerably, and it's getting it right. So, what we're talking about now is more than likely that people have made their minds up that they are either Venetians or something else, or Neanderthals, for example. And I think there's a lot of big grey area about range in this particular field, geographic range.
Yeah. Sorry,
absolutely.
I haven't read the story, so I'm sorry if I'm being ignorant about this. Did they have more than one skull then? Like, are there multiples? Like, how are they? Do they have a grouping of bones and fossils that they think, oh, okay, we're finding these similar things in different sites, and therefore, like, do they have? How do they know? Because I'm thinking here, one of the other things for viewers who maybe don't know so much as well, of course, is that sometimes male skulls could be a bit more robust than female skulls, or can have like slightly different like configurations in the jawline, or like there are even just variations based on like the biological sex part. So I think sometimes what we don't know is if you only have one skull, but it happens to be like a very burly gentleman from that particular species, if we find a fairly petite female skull, you might think it was a different species if you only have
exactly
those two. And so that's
that's
part
happened.
of the problem.
That's happened. Yeah.
So that's why I'm asking questions. I'm asking a lot of questions.
So
I know you've only just read the article too, but yeah, I was just curious.
To answer that question, no, there is no new skull. In fact, there's no new fossil evidence at all.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. That's why this designation is kind of baloney. Okay. Because all that was done was they reclassified already designated fossils. They basically went and said, we're going to look for different patterns, which is perfectly good. That's good. What you should do. I like that. You should do that. But what they found and the way they're organizing the fossils is leading to this new designation. And many people, bioanths, do not agree with it because these fossils were already designated under different species.
Okay. So is it almost like what they're trying to do is they're actually trying to consolidate? Like, are these guys literally saying, hey, look, everyone, we've got like this, these fossils from here, those ones from there. Like, this is bonkers that we have several names floating around. Why don't we umbrella them in and give them all one name? Is that kind of, which I'm all about. I like that concept, but it sounds like maybe they didn't get the buy-in from their colleagues
it's kind of
before
sounding like that. I don't know if you remember, maybe it was 1 or 2 years ago, maybe even 3, Homo bodensis or bodiensis or something.
I do remember that name. Yeah.
That's exactly what that was. It was an attempt to group already designated hominins into a new species to make it just more simple. And that that didn't stick at all.
I think what you'd have to do is you'd have to like throw a nice party, I think, and invite all the main folks in the field, and then have my own little Homo sapiens making a guest appearance. And really sit down. I think you'd almost need like a symposium if you really wanted to get serious about it, and actually invite everybody. And oh my gosh, you could do one of those where we lock everyone in a room for 48 hours. You're like, we're going to do this. We're going to come up with a name. Oh my gosh.
You'd have to have a sign outside the door. No weapons or knives. Like, no weapons out in the building.
Exactly. We're going to lock you guys in the room and we're going to make you figure it out. Oh, that would be funny. That'd be an interesting weekend. Those of us like from the paleo like art side, we can just sit there with our popcorn and watch the action.
Yeah, the bioancer. We're a crazy bunch.
Yeah,
We're a
we love
crazy
you, but
bunch.
you guys are definitely you're very passionate. I'll call you passionate.
Or nuts.
You're
Or
nuts.
nuts.
Yeah,
Yeah. It's I'll take the second one. It's pretty true.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, oh my gosh.
It's
Okay, well,
pretty
on
we
that
and
note, we can keep going
yeah.
forever. But should we move
Let's
to a story I'm very excited about?
yes, let's
Okay.
travel now from Asia
Yes.
to the deserts of Israel.
Okay, so now we are going to be talking about Minot Cave in northern Israel, and what's so interesting. So Israel's part of what's called the Southern Levant, which is Lebanon, Israel, Jordan. I think a little bit of northern Saudi is often included in there too, if I'm not mistaken. But it's a whole region that's known to have had Homo sapien and Neanderthals living in it for a long time. It's one of the main, it's the north route out of Africa. So whenever we have any of these, like the Sahara goes green and our ancestors go scampering out across the globe, this is one of the regions where they tend to go through. And there's out migrations. I've also seen some neat genetics for back migrations from there back into
Yes.
Africa. So it's a two-way street, or often known as the bus depot of the Middle East. That everybody seems to pass through there, right? So here's what's so odd, which is that the destinations, the Paleolithic Europe, all these areas in Asia, Australia, the Americas, all these places where these folks went have lots of examples of cultural traditions, art, artifacts, like all of these things. But the region itself, right there in the middle, doesn't seem to have much. Now, parts of it have not been well studied or documented. So part of it is certainly that, which is just that there have not been people on the ground looking. But certainly in Israel, there's a pretty long tradition of certainly Paleolithic archaeology, where they've done lots of good work. And George and I in 2022, we got to go to Mount Carmel, which was so exciting for me because one of the first caves I read about as an undergraduate was School. And School has these wonderful Middle Paleolithic burials. They're like, what, 100,000, 120,000 years ago. So I totally selfied School. I was like, I'm here. Oh my gosh, it was the best. So that's how you get Genevieve excited. I was definitely fangirling about being at one of my favorite sites. And there was engraved marks on the back of the cave there, which was like really cool too, because those have only ever been published locally, which is wild. And so, but yeah, so to set the scene here, we can count on both hands, basically, George. Would you agree with me? Like, there's almost no parietal art. So parietal is like parietal is the word we use to refer to wall art or rock art proper. So raw like art, so whether engravings or paintings that are made on walls, ceilings, floors of caves, or very large immovable pieces of rock. Is basically what it is, right? So the idea is it's anchored somewhere in place, and that's where it was made, as opposed to portable art, which are small pieces you could stick in a pocket or easily take with you somewhere, and therefore they're not anchored in the same way. So parietal and portable, those are usually the two ways we separate. There is very little parietal art in the Levant from the Paleolithic period. Later on, they get busy and there's ibex and all sorts of fun stuff everywhere. But no, it doesn't mean it's not there. It just means it has not necessarily been recognized. Or again, I mean, George, we talk about this all the time. If you don't find what you're not looking for,
I'm going to jump in with my two big feet.
do it.
Since 2022 and our visit there,
Yes.
I went back, as you know, about a year and a half ago, and I went to Skull Cave, in fact. And the reason being, and you couldn't make it up, but when we were together in 2022, I took loads of photographs of potential panels within Skull Cave. Now, just put that into context for people who don't know Skull Cave, it is a cave, but it isn't, because in the 20th century, it was blasted to hell. So there's just all you have surviving now is just the back end of the cave. And much further forward, there are Natufian burials. There's some really nice Natufian, which are around about 12,000 years old. And I'll be talking about that a little bit later on. However, I took loads of photographs of the panels there, the potential panels. Obviously, with what I was looking at, you can't see with the naked eye, so you have to put it through that algorithm D-stretch, which is a color algorithm which teases out reds, yellows, and blacks, which you can't see with the naked eye. You put them through your computer, and voila, they may turn up. Anyway, I was with the First Art team in Spain and Portugal. We were going through the photography. And guess what? And I forgot to mention this to you because it's because
I know about Al-Wad, but you didn't mention anything about school. It's hard to keep up. There's so much going on.
I'm in trouble. Well, with Skull Cave, we've got a lovely single red hematite line going diagonally across the back end of the cave. So that's been sampled. The reason why I probably said nothing about it was because I probably couldn't say anything about it, but I don't care now because it's been going on long enough. And also, more importantly, we couldn't get a date off it because there was obviously no calcite flowing over it. No. However, other caves within the area have yielded painted art, including a figurative animal from a cave called Red Cave. And again, we haven't publicised it because we were meant to be, before October the 7th, that terrible incursion by Hamas into Israel, we were meant to be working on that cave. And in fact, in the May of that year, which is 2023, I was there doing just that, finding new rock art not just within Skull Cave, because I found more rock art there, and the First Art team finding stuff in Red Cave, but also in Jamal Cave, which is the cave next door to El Wad, which is in that Mount Carmel area. And I found some absolutely fantastic, maybe 5 panels of finger dots. Again, these are just initial observations. We've done nothing with them at all, not that I'm aware of anyway.
So everybody's getting in on the prelims. This is exciting.
Yeah, it is exciting because again, it's that same old story, Jen, as you well know. Yeah. If you are an archaeologist, you look down on the floor. If you are into rock art, you look at the ceilings and the wall. Yeah, and that's what we've been doing. And what was really interesting about Jamal Cave, the Jamal Cave is a show cave where they've got sort of mannequins.
I remember that cave. Yeah.
And they've got skins against the wall. So it's really there for people like school children and students to understand what the cave would have been used for. But when you remove all that stuff outside the cave and you start to scrutinize the walls, you're seeing stuff. And I'm very excited. I'm very excited about Jamal Cave because with my poor eyesight, I found it. Nobody else said I found it. Yeah. So I'm really pleased. And also the single line plus the rock art in Skull Cave is my discovery as well. So
that's fantastic.
Yeah. I've got to mention it to you because we've been talking about so many other things. And also, I think at the end of the day, like I say, because of the politics in that part of the Middle East, you just put everything on hold. And you pray that something's going to happen. That someone's going to sort of stick a hand out to shake, and everything's going to be then nice and peaceful. But at the moment, I can't see that thing happening. So, in many respects, I'm going to be waiting for quite a long time for, first of all, to do further research, then to write the paper. I am writing the paper with one or two people from Haifa University, but it's new stuff. Anyway, there we are.
That's amazing. No, that was really fun though, because then again, literally, they got to hear me learning about it too. My brain's already moving in like 10 directions at once. Okay, I'm gonna stay on track though, because otherwise we'll be here this will be like the half day episode because we've been having some fun side quests. But totally relevant because this is exactly the whole point. So Minot Cave, they've known for quite a long time that people lived in the entrance to there. And so going back to that concept of what do we know, what did we understand about art? There's literally 2 or 3 caves that have parietal marks in them that are recorded and sort of officially known. George is about to double that number. So that's fantastic. So in Minot Cave, though, basically there's people living at the front of the cave doing their thing. There's no art at the front of the cave, no parietal art. They have portable pieces which they're notched bones. And there's also evidence of ochre in some of the layers there. But what is interesting about Minot Cave is that the deep part of the cave is a massive chamber, 100 meters squared, it's large. They said they think it was big enough that you could probably put, 50 to 100 people in there if you wanted to. So it's a very large cave. So what it is, they lived at the front. You go down into the dark part of the cave, and there's speleothems that almost create like a separation. So these are like stalactites, stalagmites for the viewers, so that are kind of acting almost as creating like this amazing rock curtain that you move through to go into this deep, big chamber. And then even within the big chamber, there's like a hidden chamber, which is behind more of the stalactites and stalagmites. So we got a chamber in the back of the cave with a little hidden chamber beside it. Like it's got a very ritual feel, but room for lots of people. And in this chamber, up on a niche in the chamber, so somebody put it up there, there is a boulder. And I actually went and I used the AI and we figured out a good example to give to people. So this boulder makes sense. Like, how big is it? So it's about the size of a piece of carry-on luggage when you're talking about the physical dimensions of it. Yeah. So, I mean, we went and found a good analogy to help people. I couldn't wrap my head around it either. I'm not very good at that visual stuff. And so we were like, but it weighed about 70 pounds or about 28 kilos. So that kind of, that heavy piece of carry-on that you're watching somebody struggle to shove above their seat to play. It's basically that. So they put that up on a niche. It's the only piece there so far that has been noted to have any decoration. It was engraved with what they call polygons and chevrons. So it's basically a cool pattern, and it's covering about 3 sides of the boulder. And they were able to, like, what they think it is, they think they were replicating the pattern from a turtle shell.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that neat? Yeah. And then they were able to actually date. There was calcite that had dripped onto the boulder and was actually inside the engraving. So that's beautiful because we know the engravings must have been made before that. And the calcite crust dates to around 36,000. So that's fantastic. So it's an earlier age, which matches the living at the front. So what we have in the Middle East is we have what's called the Levantine origination. So the origination, for those who know, if that name sounds familiar, that's the term we use to describe the first main Homo sapien culture in Europe, which is 30,000 to 40,000-ish years ago. Art like Chauvet comes out of that time frame. So that is the very sort of classic, like, ordination art would be a Chauvet. The portable pieces from Germany, like those female figures, the Lion Man, all that kind of stuff, those are all origination, just to give people the vibe of what it feels like in Europe. There's also a very specific set of tools, and that's actually how it's designated, is there's certain tools that they're using. And so this is where they find very similar tools in the Middle East, in this Levant area, from around the same time. And so the question has always been, did it come from the Levant and go up into Europe, or is it a back migration of ordinations who wandered back down into the Middle East, which we don't know. I'm not sure. George may have some ideas here in a sec. But we don't, considering how artistic the ordination folk were in Europe, it's always been weird that they're not doing the same traditions in the Levant. Now, it could also be, though, again, we're talking about portable materials. I'm not portable, sorry, like perishables. So things like maybe they were doing it on skins or wood or things that aren't lasting in the archaeological record, which is possible. It's also possible, again, that, I mean, look at George is wandering around and finding art all over the place. So again, it could just be that, people are looking down and not at the walls and the ceilings. And again, no slight to everybody. We all have our specialties. So that's kind of where it's good to work in teams, right? This is where cooperation is the future, people, not fighting. Right. So we got to get it together there with our people in our field. But so this is where we're finding new things. But this idea of it being a ritual space, of it being somewhere where maybe it was what they call an aggregation site, so that maybe several groups came together here and participated in some sort of rituals back there. This is certainly how they are kind of envisioning there being a separate ritual space and then a separate living space. But in this really interesting time period called the Levantine origination, where pretty much the only other stuff we have from that time period is I've just been doing a deep dive, actually, for George and I, like a new article we're working on. But it's mostly, there's notched bones is more like what that time period is known for, as funny as it sounds. So these are literally bones, especially the scapula of gazelles, of all things, that seem to be repetitively being notched on the edges. They don't know whether it's decorative, whether it's functional in some kind. There's, of course, there are beads, so they're wearing personal adornment, but and they're doing things like burials, but very little evidence of any type of artistic tradition. So this is exciting. And then because I was doing the deep dive, I've been trying to literally build a frame of reference and familiarize myself with like what is everything we know in this region. And I stumbled across, and so we'll show it for the viewers. There is a site in it's called Aina Kashish. If I had to take a guess, they've got 3 plaquettes they've found there. So these are, again, portable artifacts. One of the 3 plaquettes looks almost identical. It's got that same chevron style, like that kind of, the way turtle shells look, almost these little triangles that are all attaching to each other. It's a portable piece. It's engraved that way, which I'm super intrigued by, because they were making the argument that we know they were eating turtles and that maybe turtles had some symbolic cultural importance to them. And so it may be that, it could also be they were talking about acoustics. So now we're wandering into your territory there, George. And that they may have also been, again, doing reverberating sounds and like things like that as well in this chamber, so that it had very good acoustics back there. So that could also be part of it. But very neat to be finding these symbolic spaces, and especially in an area like that where we know so little, every new discovery is huge and suddenly opens the door to all these new ways of thinking. But I'm very intrigued by having just recently seen something that looks so similar in Jordan. And it's like, well, maybe this is a broader tradition of these sort of turtle shell type patterns, which would be so fascinating because we don't see that in other parts of the world. So it seems very specific at this point to the Southern Levant. But I believe the acoustics might fit in well with what you wanted to talk about. Hey, George?
Yes, and it's coincidentally, it's in your neck of the woods that you've just been talking about.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at a cave. This was reported in the Science News a few months ago, but it's a place called Ain Malaha, which is another cave site. Surprise, surprise. And what was really quite interesting was it was excavated a few years ago, and all the bone material from the various parts of the excavation were bagged together or bagged up, and then archived. And then someone's gone back, I think probably a postgrad student, to look at the bone in more detail. In particular, the person was interested in bird bone assemblages, and so you got all manner of bird bone assemblages there. Anyway, in amongst that assemblage of bird bone were up to about 12 flutes found made from bird bone. And what was really interesting, what's been ascertained from that research, looking at the actual flutes. The flutes are varying sizes, and obviously the much larger ones gives a more deeper sound, obviously, and the smaller ones give a more like a piccolo sound, so very, very high-pitched sound. And when blown, or when they've actually blown through on replicated reproductions of these bones, they found that they make noises similar to birds of prey. Guess what? The bones are from birds of prey. So the birds of prey bones are being made into flutes, and they are being blown probably to attract birds of prey for whatever reason. It could be totemic. I wouldn't think they're a nice thing to eat, but we've got to keep our minds open about it. So it's really quite interesting sort of thing to think about, that in this one cave with an assemblage which was discovered many, many years ago, it's now being re-looked at, and in amongst that, forgotten but not really looked at properly, was evidence of 12 flutes, and which is very, very exciting. And it sort of coincides. I don't know if you remember the last episode we did a few weeks ago. I was talking about a project that I'm involved in terms of archaeoacoustics, and this is the archaeoacoustics in a cave, to see how sound reverberates around a cave. And we're going to use all manner of things in there, including flutes, in fact. But I'm now rethinking now seeing this article, to think that maybe we could get our specialists, the flute makers, to make something out of bird bone, out of a big bone and a small bone, and just see how that reverberates around the cave as well. I'm not saying that within the cave that we're going to be looking at in Portugal, they were there to scavenge or to collect bird bones. However, it does answer a few questions about how that sound reverberates around a cave system. So I'm really quite excited about it, and it was just coincidentally. I'm always keeping an eye out for flutes because a few years ago I had the honor of being in Slovenia, and there they discovered because they always talk about, oh, we got the oldest bird bone, the oldest flute here. No, we got it here. We got it here. Well, in Slovenia they've got a Neanderthal flute there, going back 50 to 60,000 years ago, and it's got 3 note holes to play with. It was obviously a much larger or longer to play, but it is really quite exciting, really.
Yeah. Well, that's fantastic. Oh my gosh. Well, I mean, again, it's wild to think it was just sitting there, isn't it? Like when you like it was sitting there. I mean, what is sitting in museums all over the place, right? Like it's that's fantastic. Oh, and I'm really intrigued by the different size and different sounds. It's like they had like a whole, what do they call it? The wind section of the orchestra.
Exactly. Yeah. So if you look at the piccolo, the flute, the bassoon, these all are wind instruments, but all have very, very different notation and structures, music structures within their the way they're played.
Yeah. So I'm thinking about, for instance, like, Istoritz, where there's like a lot of flutes that come out of that site. And that was another big aggregation site up that's sort of between the sort of that Dordogne, France region and then into northern Spain. There we got that one. And then, of course, there's the flutes out of Eastern Europe as well. Like there's concentrations, and it's interesting when you find them together, which again speaks to it kind of being not like a one-off, but maybe something that people did, as you were saying, maybe as part of their traditions. But I'm thinking as well too that there's definitely birds of prey are interesting. I mean, we have Neanderthals as well who were collecting the feathers, if you remember as well, and the claws. That was from eagles, and then also from like crows and ravens were like feathers, claws, things like that. So it's interesting to wonder if they were just picking them because they were around, or symbolically were they picking those on purpose because of the characteristics of those birds, which is kind of, I think, what you were getting at. And then also, I'm imagining in the caves, the kind of reverberating sound that could create would be pretty impressive.
Especially if you're playing the flutes all at the same time on the same note.
Yeah.
Because you get a crescendo of sound
coming through. You'd be able to just feel it. Ooh, I love it. You're giving me chills.
I will hasten to add to our viewers and listeners that, remember, the bone assemblage was 1,100 bones, which have been archived, and they come from what we call a Natufian assemblage. So that's around about 12,000 years ago, between 12 and 14,000 years ago. So it's quite recent within what you've been talking about earlier on in this episode. But again, nonetheless, it just tells you about the things we seem to forget or ignore about what's going on in early prehistoric life.
Well, I think it goes back to as well that, I mean, this is where there's different patterns of behavior in the Levant, and I think we see that all over the world, which is going to develop things at different times in different places. Because certainly with what I've seen as well, I was seeing, because again, I've been doing this deep dive for our article, that, again, they're already starting to process wild grains at like 23,000 years ago in that region. So literally like millet, barley, like they're finding the wild pollen. I think that was Ohalo, wasn't it? I think they found that. And so that's around 23,000. And so there's the patterns are going to be different in different regions. And I'm thinking as well, so the Natufian, for people who don't know, is a very early, it's almost like the crossover to agriculture in that particular part of the world. And they start doing really interesting things. Like they're very, and so this is the point where cultural symbolic artifacts explode in that region, hey? Because then the Tufians are doing all sorts of crazy cool stuff, like making face masks of the dead, and like weren't they doing all sorts of things? Like they were actually plastering the skulls, and like there's a lot going on. And so it's really interesting because that's sort of the same time period then as like Göbekli Tepe, right? Up in Turkey. And there's actually quite a few of those sites. So there's a lot of monumental sites, right? Which of course is right up your alley. You like that stuff, George. You like your tombs and monuments.
Well, just remember, if we think about 12,000 years BC, in the Levant,
Yep.
what were we doing in northwestern Europe at 12,000 BC? And so there's a complete changeover in economics, in symbolic behavior, all the things that are everything that we were doing 12,000 years ago in northwestern Europe had been and gone 20,000 years previously in the Levant. Things were progressing pretty quickly with this development of the Fertile Crescent, and the idea of what we would call now, certainly in Western European terms, Neolithicization, where they were going from hunting and gathering to organizing the landscape in a prescribed way and burying the dead in a specific way. I don't know if you remember, Genevieve, when we were in El Wad, I remember being outside and being shown those little pits where the burials were placed. So they were actually curing the body, then placing the body parts inside these small little pits. And incidentally, it was excavated by a big hero of mine, Dorothy Garrod, in the 1950s.
Yes. She is a pioneer in the field for sure, Dorothy Garrod. Yeah, I've been doing a lot of reading about her too, just because of the area we're in. But yeah, there's so much evidence, and also this is where the different type of landscape, because the environment has changed so much in Europe too. We've lost a lot of those open air sites, and so whereas in this region, they're finding like hut structures. So they're finding like because again, it's closer to the surface because of the area becoming more of a desert. We don't have huge forests that have literally grown up over top of all the sites necessarily in the same way and all that thing. Because I know Seth was asking us even before we started about what's with the caves, right? Just for viewers' sake, right? Which was that, why are we always talking about caves? Because I'm talking about a cave, you're talking about a cave, George, with your stuff. And I think it's just because what people have to understand is that caves are time capsules. They protect things because they are enclosed, and then even more so if the entrance has collapsed and sealed it in. Caves are going to protect from environmental conditions that are going to destroy or obscure sites that are on the outside. And so of course people were living out in the open or living at the entrances of caves or moving around the landscape, but that stuff can be so easily wiped out, especially with, like thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of years passing in some cases. So it's more, the way I always like to describe it is, the caves are literally probably showing us like a fraction of what used to exist. So, again, this is where we could be missing like the entire, we could be missing so much of the story, because of our own restrictions for what's been preserved and survived. But this is where, again, we also need to go back and look for things in areas that maybe we like those bags of bones where we nobody had noticed all of the flutes there until somebody went back and looked. And so I think though that this is where it's not that there's not open air stuff, and different parts of the world, again, deserts preserve those open air sites often better. And so this is where, in Jordan as well, I've seen some neat stuff from like 20 to 25,000 where there are hut structures, like simple, they think they're like brushwood hut structures that have been preserved in that desert landscape, and they're not buried under 10 feet of dirt and don't have a big forest or a highway across them, right? So we're finding them, whereas we're not necessarily finding those things in other parts of the world where the physical environment has changed so much. But yeah, so I know Seth had asked, George, you may want to add something there too, but that was kind of my...
I was going to say two things. Relic landscapes in arid environments. The beautiful thing is if you've got stone tools or a lithic scatter in an arid environment such as Israel, for example, or Jordan, as we know, when the soil gets blown away, the heavy stuff goes to the relic land, to the bottom of the relic landscape, and voila, there's your lithic scatter. And usually you can do big refits. And I don't know if you remember when we were in the National Museum archives in Jerusalem a few years ago, we were shown these massive big refits.
Yes.
So large flint nodules which have been worked and the tools taken away and the debitage all stuck back together again to show these big refits. Now, one little funny story I'll do before I shut my mouth is the Doniford Gravels. And the Doniford Gravels is a big deposit which lines the Devonshire coast. So if any of you know the British Isles, you'll know there's the Bristol Channel, you've got Wales to the north of the Bristol Channel, and Devon and Cornwall, which are two large counties to the south. And what happened in the last glaciation the glaciation before that is that Neanderthals were producing these beautiful Herschelian hand axes. About 25 to 30 have been found so far. And what has happened is that the glacier has come down and violently scraped the landscape, including all the hand axe sites where they were making this stuff, and moved it into a big gravel deposit called the Doniford Gravels on the North Devonshire coast. And that's where we're finding lots of evidence of Neanderthal and maybe earlier worked material being gathered up and dumped on this particular.
Okay, because I think I live on the edge of a gravel deposit as well from one of the North American glaciers where I live. We have a lot of gravel. So was it? I think of it almost like the glaciers were acting like a bulldozer, basically, and just shoving it in front of them, right? And then when they melted, all that stuff just stayed. So the downside is it's no longer in context, so to speak. But the upside is that it's revealing things that may otherwise have been buried and we wouldn't have seen them. Would that be kind of so? The Neanderthal sites might be slightly further north, but it's all gotten shoved into these deposits.
Yeah, that's right. And to a geologist, it's great news. To an archaeologist, it's frustrating. And then one little side story to that is that we've got material here which has been made by Neanderthals in the British Isles. However, we have very little, in fact, very limited evidence of actual human remains or hominin remains belonging to Neanderthals, apart from one cave, Pontynewydd, which is up in the north of Wales. And in Pontynewydd Cave, 30,000 years ago, it was covered by 2 kilometers of ice. But what preserved the deposits, as you quite rightly said, is that the cave acts as a time capsule. It seals the harsh environment from the outside, doesn't come in. And we found from there, wait for it, six teeth. That was it. 6 teeth.
Yeah, but again, we know teeth are very important, and teeth can also be used to do all sorts of fun stuff. So, I think I think the conclusion here, as always, is just that it's such a fun and interesting field, and there's the stories. I mean, there's stories we haven't even talked to. There's more stories for the next episode. Like, there's so much coming out all the time, and it feels like I'm so thrilled that I feel like the general public is getting more and more interested in this stuff and getting like quite well educated. Like, I think we get great questions. I feel like our viewers, maybe I'm biased, but I feel like we have a very intelligent viewership who ask really good questions and get really excited about things. And I think it's so fun that we're kind of constantly learning these new little bits and pieces that are painting this picture out, because right now it's just what we know is so narrow, and it's fun every time we learn these new things to sort of better comprehend what the world must have been like for those people. Because I think that for me, that's half the fun, is imagining what would have been like, to stand in that ritual chamber at Minot Cave and listen to them sing or play flutes or do percussion and be a part of those sorts of it must have been wild. It must have been amazing. So, I think that's where, for me, that's what makes this so exciting is that ability to almost like time travel back there and just imagine what our ancestors, because they were us, right? Like, even if there's some time and space separating, they were us. And it's interesting, these early chapters that we're starting to learn so much more of our story. So yay paleoanthropology.
Absolutely. And I think that's a wonderful place for us to wrap off this episode 9 of season 3. You know what that means, you guys? That means the next episode is the season finale. I can't believe it, of season 3 of the PaleoPost podcast. And boy, oh boy, do we have exciting plans for season 4. So be sure to subscribe, catch up on, the 30 episodes that we have now.
Isn't that wild?
In our library. So tons of fun and content and hours of listening. We look forward to it. Let us know what you think, how we've improved, what we can do next. And we'll see you all in the next episode.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Happy Christmas.